The stars looked peaceful from the bridge of the horizon's edge. Commander Jake Morrison sat in his chair, watching the endless darkness of space. He was 35 years old and had never seen a war. Nobody had. Not him, not his parents, not even his great-great-great-grandparents going back 200 generations. War was something that existed only in history books, like a disease that humanity had cured 6,000 years ago. Jake's ship was an exploration vessel. It had science labs, living quarters for 40 crew members, and engines that could travel between stars. What it did not have were weapons. There was no need for weapons anymore. The galaxy had learned to live in peace. Dr. Lisa Grant walked onto the bridge carrying her datapad. She was the ship's lead scientist, studying alien life forms and how different species could live together without fighting. Lisa was writing a book about how humanity had evolved beyond violence. She believed that peace was now part of human nature, bred into their genes over thousands of years. "Commander, we're approaching New Portland," Lisa said. "The colony should be visible on screens in 5 minutes." New Portland was a human colony on the edge of Federation space. 3 million people lived there, farming and building a new society on a planet with purple skies and 2 moons. Jake had visited once before. The colonists were friendly people who grew strange crops and made excellent wine. But when the horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel, something was wrong. The planet was dark. There should have been city lights covering the night side of the world. There should have been communication signals filling the radio channels. Instead, there was only silence. "Scan the surface," Jake ordered. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. A cold feeling was growing in his stomach. The ship's sensors painted a picture that made no sense. The cities were gone, not damaged or broken, but completely erased. Where millions of people had lived yesterday, there was now only bare rock and ash. The rivers had been boiled away. The forests had been burned to nothing. Lisa stared at the screens, her face pale. "This is impossible." "What could do this?" "There's a transmission," the communications officer said. "It's repeating on all channels." A voice filled the bridge. It spoke in cold, mechanical tones that had been translated into human language. This world belonged to the Dravak Imperium. Its people resisted. This is the result. All human worlds will surrender or share this fate. You have 30 days to comply. Jake felt something he had never experienced before. It took him a moment to recognize it as fear. Real fear. Not the nervous feeling before giving a speech or the worry about making a mistake. This was the deep, ancient fear of death and destruction. "Send a message to Earth," he said quietly. "Tell them we need help." The message traveled at the speed of light, taking hours to reach the capital of the Human Federation. When it arrived, it caused chaos. President Daniel Cole called an emergency meeting of his advisors. None of them knew what to do. The military was ceremonial, trained only to help during natural disasters and direct traffic at parades. The last person to study real military tactics had died 4,000 years ago. Ambassador Claire Watson attended an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The council was a gathering of all the peaceful races in the galaxy. The Zenari were philosophers who spent their time thinking deep thoughts. The Kelthans were artists who created beautiful sculptures. The Provians were mathematicians who calculated the movements of stars. All of them were peaceful. All of them were horrified by what had happened at New Portland. "We must negotiate," said the Zenari representative. "Violence is never the answer." "We can offer them art and culture," suggested the Kelthan delegate. "Perhaps they simply need to understand beauty." Claire Watson listened to their suggestions and felt her frustration growing. These species had been peaceful for so long that they had forgotten predators existed. They thought everyone could be reasoned with, that every problem had a peaceful solution. "The Dravak don't want to negotiate," Claire said. "They want to conquer. They've destroyed 17 other galaxies. They don't care about our art or our philosophy. They only understand strength." "But we have no strength," the Zenari replied sadly. "We have chosen peace." The Dravak did not wait for negotiations. Their fleet appeared at the edge of human space like a swarm of locusts. Thousands of ships, each one built for war, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets. They moved through Federation space methodically, giving each world the same choice: surrender or die. Some colonies chose to surrender. The Dravak enslaved them, putting the humans to work in mines and factories. Some colonies chose to fight with whatever they had: mining lasers, construction equipment, civilian ships ramming into Dravak warships. These colonies died. The Dravac showed no mercy to those who resisted. On Earth, President Cole sat in his office and stared at the casualty reports. 3 billion humans were dead or enslaved. The number kept growing every day. The Federation had no weapons to fight back with. They had no soldiers who knew how to use weapons. They had built a perfect, peaceful society, and now that society was being torn apart. Dr. Henry Brooks was a historian who studied the ancient past. He spent his days reading old documents and trying to understand what life had been like when humans still fought wars. Most people thought his work was pointless. Why study violence when it no longer existed? But Henry had always believed that forgetting the past was dangerous. One night, unable to sleep, Henry was searching through old military archives. Most of the files were corrupted or written in language that nobody used anymore. But he found a reference to something called the Last Resort Protocol. The file said it was created just before the Long Peace began. It said that humanity had prepared for the possibility that war might return someday. Henry brought his finding to General Patricia Flynn. Patricia was one of the few people in the Federation who still had the title of general, though she had never commanded anyone in battle. She helped coordinate disaster responses and managed supply logistics, but she still studied old military manuals as a hobby, fascinated by the strategies of ancient commanders. Patricia and Henry worked through the night, searching for more information. They found fragments of data, pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across 6,000 years. There was a facility on Mars sealed and forgotten. There was something called Project Warhammer. There were references to soldiers, but not ordinary soldiers. Enhanced soldiers. Warriors from another age. We need to tell the president, Patricia said. President Cole listened to their theory and made a decision. Open the vault. If our ancestors left us a way to survive, we need to find it. The Horizon's Edge changed course toward Mars. Jake Morrison no longer commanded a science vessel. He was now part of a mission to find humanity's last hope. The entrance to Vault 7 was buried under 300 meters of Martian rock, hidden beneath Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. The facility had been sealed for 6,000 years, its location lost to time and deliberately erased from public records. Only the automated systems deep underground remembered it existed. Jake Morrison stood with his crew outside the drilling site, watching massive machines bore through ancient stone. Dr. Henry Brooks stood beside him, reviewing data on his pad. The historian looked tired. He had barely slept since discovering the references to this place. "What do you think we'll find down there?" Jake asked. Henry did not answer right away. "Something our ancestors thought we might need but hoped we would never use." It took 3 days of continuous drilling to reach the outer door. When the drill bit finally broke through into the chamber beyond, sensors detected the breach. Lights that had been dark for 60 centuries flickered to life. Air circulation systems hummed as they began working again. A synthesized voice echoed through the tunnels, speaking in an ancient dialect of English that the translation computers struggled to understand. Defense protocol activated. Threat level critical. Authorization required. Jake led the team down into the vault. The corridors were wide and made of metal that showed no signs of age. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim blue glow. The air smelled stale but was breathable. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness. The first chamber they entered was enormous. It stretched away into darkness, filled with row after row of large cylindrical pods. Each pod was made of transparent material, and inside each pod was a person, a human being, perfectly preserved, floating in some kind of fluid. They wore strange uniforms that nobody had seen outside of museums. Lisa Grant approached one of the pods carefully. Her scanner showed that the person inside was alive, but in a state of deep suspended animation. His vital signs were barely detectable, just enough to maintain life. According to the pod's display, his name was Captain Kyle Sanders, age 32, but the date showed he had been placed in stasis 6,047 years ago. "There are 10,000 pods in this chamber," Patricia Flynn said, her voice filled with awe. 10,000 soldiers. Henry found a central computer terminal and managed to activate it. The screen showed files and files of information. Personnel records, training manuals, weapon specifications, and something called Project Warhammer. He began reading, and with each page, his eyes grew wider. The truth was almost unbelievable. Before humanity entered its age of peace, military leaders had worried about the future. They believed peace was wonderful, but they also understood that the universe was vast and unknown. What if something came from beyond their knowledge? What if humanity's children forgot how to defend themselves? So they created Project Warhammer. They asked for volunteers from among their best soldiers, men and women who had fought in the last wars of the violent age. These volunteers agreed to undergo extreme modifications, genetic enhancements to make them faster and stronger, cybernetic implants to improve their reflexes and connect them to weapon systems, neural augmentation to increase their tactical thinking. Then they were placed in stasis, frozen in time, waiting for the day they might be needed. They were humanity's insurance policy, warriors preserved from an age when war was understood, held in reserve for a future that might need them again. Can we wake them up? President Cole asked over the communication link from Earth. His face on the screen looked desperate. A medical officer named Dr. Sharon Wells examined the stasis systems. The technology is incredibly advanced, better than anything we have now. The awakening process will take time, but yes, I believe we can revive them. Do it, Cole ordered. Wake them all. The process began with Captain Kyle Sanders. His pod was connected to awakening systems that slowly brought his body back to full function. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of gradually increasing his temperature, restarting his enhanced metabolism, and bringing his consciousness back from the deep places where it had rested for 6 millennia. When Kyle Sanders opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Lisa Grant looking down at him through the pod's transparent surface. For a moment, he was confused. He remembered volunteering for the stasis program. He remembered saying goodbye to a world at the edge of peace. He remembered closing his eyes, and now they were open again and everything felt wrong. Kyle sat up slowly as the pod opened. His body worked perfectly, the enhancements functioning as designed. But the people around him were different. They moved wrong. They stood too close to each other, with no awareness of tactical positioning. They smiled too easily. They were soft in a way that soldiers should never be. How long? Kyle asked, his voice rough from disuse. 6,000 years, Henry Brooks said gently. Kyle absorbed this information. 6,000 years. Everyone he had known was dust. The world he remembered was ancient history. He looked at the people around him and saw that they were his descendants, hundreds of generations removed. And they had no idea how to fight. More soldiers were awakened over the following weeks. Lieutenant Megan Price came out of stasis and immediately began assessing the situation with a tactical mind that had not changed despite the millennia. Sergeant Chris Baldwin woke up and asked for his rifle before asking where he was. Corporal Amy Hughes opened her eyes and knew instantly that something was terribly wrong with the soft, peaceful people surrounding her. The cultural shock went both ways. Modern humans were disturbed by how the soldiers talked about violence so casually. The awakened warriors moved with controlled aggression, always aware of exits and threats. They sized up every person they met, unconsciously categorizing them as potential allies or enemies. Their humor was dark and their worldview shaped by experiences that current humanity found disturbing. Lisa Grant tried to interview Kyle about his past. She wanted to understand how people thought when war was normal, but the conversation left her shaken. Kyle viewed everything through the lens of threat assessment. When she explained how the Galactic Council believed in universal cooperation, he laughed bitterly. "You built a paradise," he told her. "That's beautiful. But paradises need guardians and you forgot to keep any." President Cole met with Kyle and Megan in a secure conference room. He explained the situation with the Dravak, the billions of humans already dead, the fact that the Federation had no real military. Kyle listened and then spoke bluntly. "You're going to lose. Your ships are too weak. Your people don't know how to fight. The Dravak will roll over you like a wave over sand." "Then what do we do?" Cole asked. "You learn," Megan Price said. "We teach you. We train a new generation of soldiers. We show you how to think like warriors again. It won't be pretty, and a lot of your people won't like it, but it's the only way you survive." The decision was made. The stasis soldiers would train a new army. Jake Morrison volunteered immediately, along with 5,000 others from across the Federation. They became the first new army, the first humans in 6,000 years to train specifically for war. The training was brutal. Modern humans were physically softer. Their bodies adapted to comfortable lives. Psychologically, they struggled with the aggressive mindset required for combat. Many quit in the first week, unable to handle the stress. But some, like Jake, felt something awakening inside them. Ancient instincts that had been dormant but never erased. Kyle pushed them hard. "Your enemy won't give you time to think," he shouted during drills. "They won't care about your feelings. They will kill you while you hesitate." Meanwhile, Henry Brooks worked with other awakened soldiers to explore the rest of Vault 7. They found armories filled with weapons that predated the Long Peace. Fusion warheads, antimatter torpedoes, kinetic kill vehicles, technology that modern humanity had deliberately forgotten how to build. The Dravak continued their advance, conquering more worlds. The death toll rose to 3 billion. Time was running out. The awakened soldiers trained harder, pushed faster. They knew that humanity's survival depended on remembering how to be warriors again, even if that meant becoming something their peaceful society had tried to leave behind. 3 months after the awakening, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new ship, the Defiance. It was not the peaceful exploration vessel he had commanded before. The Defiance was a retrofitted cargo hauler that engineers had spent weeks converting into a warship. Weapons from Vault 7 were mounted along its hull, connected to systems that Jake was still learning to use. Captain Kyle Sanders appeared on the communication screen. The ancient warrior looked tired. Training 5,000 modern humans to think like soldiers had been harder than fighting any war he remembered. But some of them, like Jake, had shown real potential. They were learning to override 6,000 years of peaceful conditioning. "Are you ready?" Kyle asked. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew members were nervous, their hands shaking slightly. They were about to enter their first real battle. "As ready as we'll ever be," Jake said. The first new army consisted of 200 hastily converted ships. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy with thousands of years of military experience. But they had one advantage. Kyle Sanders and the other stasis soldiers understood warfare at a level the Dravak had never encountered. The target was New Haven, a human colony that the Dravak were currently invading. Kyle's plan was unconventional. Instead of meeting the enemy in a straight fight, he wanted to use hit-and-run tactics, psychological warfare, and strategies that the warrior race had never seen before. The battle began badly. The Dravak had 300 ships defending New Haven, and they were confident in their superiority. They moved in standard formation, expecting the humans to either flee or die quickly. What they got instead was chaos. Kyle's forces split into small groups, attacking from multiple angles. They would strike hard, destroy a target, and vanish before the Dravak could respond. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around obstacles. They hacked enemy communications to spread false information. They even used civilian distress signals to lure Dravak ships into traps. On the Defiance, Jake faced the moment he had been dreading. An enemy ship appeared on his screen, damaged and vulnerable. Kyle's voice came through the comm. "Take the shot now." Jake's finger hovered over the firing button. That ship had a crew, living beings who would die if he pressed the button. His entire culture had taught him that all life was precious, that killing was wrong, that there was always another way. "Jake," Kyle's voice was firm, "if you don't shoot, they will kill you and everyone on your ship. Your compassion is admirable, but misplaced compassion toward those who show none will get your people killed." Jake pressed the button. The weapon fired. The enemy ship exploded. Hundreds of Dravak crew members died instantly. Jake felt sick, but he did not look away. He had chosen survival, and survival meant accepting terrible costs. The Battle of New Haven lasted 18 hours. When it ended, humanity held the planet, but 30% of their ships were destroyed. Over 2,000 humans died, more than had died in combat in 6,000 years. For the awakened soldiers, this was an acceptable exchange ratio. For modern humans, the loss was devastating. Lisa Grant worked in the field hospital set up on New Haven's surface. The wounded came in waves. Some were injured by weapons, burns, and shrapnel wounds that medical technology could heal, but others were wounded in ways that were harder to fix. They talked about the fear of combat, the chaos of battle, the moral weight of taking a life. One young pilot grabbed Lisa's arm. "I killed them," he said, his eyes wide. "I fired the weapons and I killed people, and I can't stop seeing it." Lisa did not know what to say. All her research, all her theories about humanity evolving beyond violence seemed hollow now. Violence had not been bred out. It had only been sleeping, waiting for necessity to wake it up. Lieutenant Megan Price analyzed the battle data in the command center. The stasis soldier looked troubled. She had fought in dozens of battles in her time, and something about this one felt wrong. The Dravak had fought well, but not desperately. They had retreated in good order, preserving most of their forces. They were testing us, Megan said to Kyle. They wanted to see how we fight. They're not taking us seriously yet, Kyle understood. The Dravak had conquered 17 galaxies. They had faced countless species. They saw humanity as just another weak civilization playing at war. The Battle of New Haven had been a probe, nothing more. President Cole addressed the Federation from Earth. His speech was broadcast to every human world. "We have won our first victory," he said. "But the cost was high. Many are asking if survival is worth abandoning everything we believe in. I cannot answer that question for you. Each person must decide if they will fight or surrender. Some colonies chose surrender after hearing the casualty numbers. They could not accept the transformation that war required. Other colonies chose to fight, sending more volunteers to train with the awakened soldiers. Humanity was splitting, divided between those who would rather die peacefully and those who would kill to survive. Ambassador Claire Watson faced similar divisions in the Galactic Council. Many alien species criticized humanity for embracing violence. "You are becoming like the Dravak," the Zanari representative said sadly. Claire's response was sharp. "The Dravak choose violence. We accept it as the price of survival. There is a difference." Kyle proposed a bold new strategy to President Cole. "We need to attack their staging areas in the Outer Rim. Hit them where they feel safe. Make them respect us." The plan was aggressive and risky. It went against every instinct of modern human military doctrine, which focused on defense and minimizing casualties. But Kyle understood something important about the Dravak psychology. They were warriors who respected strength. Defensive fighting made humanity look weak. Aggressive action would make them reconsider their assessment. President Cole authorized the attack, knowing each decision pulled humanity further from the peace it had cherished. More stasis soldiers were awakened, bringing the total to 15,000. They were integrated into a rapidly expanding military structure that was learning and adapting. Henry Brooks made another discovery in Vault 7. Deep in the archives, he found plans for offensive weapons platforms that had been designed but never built. The plans were created by minds that understood war at a fundamental level. The weapons were brutal in their efficiency, designed to cause maximum damage with minimum risk to human forces. "Should we build these?" Henry asked Patricia Flynn, showing her the designs. Patricia looked at the plans and felt a chill. These weapons could destroy entire fleets. They were the tools of total war, the kind of technology that the Long Peace had deliberately abandoned. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we should let the president decide." Cole looked at the weapon designs and made a choice that he knew would define his legacy. "Build them. We didn't start this war, but we will end it." The second battle took place at the Dravak staging ground in the outer reaches. Kyle led a strike force of 200 ships deep into enemy territory. They attacked during the Dravak night cycle, when the warrior race least expected aggression from their supposedly peaceful enemy. The assault was devastating. Humanity lost 70 ships but destroyed 3 Dravak command carriers and their primary supply depot. More importantly, they sent a message that echoed across the galaxy. Humanity remembers how to bite back. Jake Morrison flew through the chaos of the battle, his enhanced reflexes from training letting him dodge enemy fire. He was no longer the peaceful exploration commander who had discovered New Portland's destruction. He was becoming something else, something harder. He wondered if he would recognize himself when this was over. The Dravak response to the Outer Reaches attack was immediate and furious. Their main fleet, which had been slowly advancing through Federation space, changed course. Every ship, every weapon, every warrior was now aimed at one target: Earth itself. The invasion force numbered 5,000 warships, the largest military concentration the galaxy had seen in recorded history. Intelligence reports gave humanity 3 months before the fleet arrived. 3 months to prepare for the battle that would determine whether humans survived as a free species or joined the countless other civilizations the Dravak had crushed. Kyle stood in the command center on Mars, looking at the tactical display. The numbers were impossible. Even with all the awakened soldiers and the newly trained forces, humanity could field only 800 warships. The Dravak had 5,000. Conventional tactics would result in total annihilation. We need the final weapon, Kyle said quietly to Megan. The one they really put us to sleep to protect. Megan nodded. She had read the deepest files in Vault 7. She knew what weapon he meant, and she knew what it would cost. Henry Brooks and Patricia Flynn worked for 3 days straight to break the final encryption in Vault 7's deepest archive. The security was unlike anything they had encountered before. It required both of them working together, using codes scattered across dozens of ancient files. When the last barrier finally fell, they understood why the information had been so carefully hidden. The file was labeled Omega Directive, Final Contingency Protocol. The document was marked with warnings in red text, written in old military language that made clear this was humanity's absolute last resort. Henry read it twice before he fully understood what he was looking at. "This is insane," Patricia whispered. "This is survival," Henry replied. They brought the file to President Cole in a sealed data container. The president read it in his private office with only Kyle Sanders present. When he finished, Cole was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked at Kyle. "Did you know about this when you went into stasis?" "No," Kyle said. "This was classified above our level. But I'm not surprised it exists. The people who created Project Warhammer understood that numbers alone might not be enough. They would have prepared something else." The Omega Directive described a weapon called the Resonance Engine. It was created by humanity's greatest scientists in the final years before the Long Peace. The device exploited something unique to human neural architecture, a specific frequency in how human brains communicated with each other. The Resonance Engine allowed specially trained individuals to enter a collective consciousness state. They would become anchors, linking their minds with every combat-capable human in range. The effect would multiply tactical awareness, reaction time, and strategic coordination exponentially. A fleet using the Resonance Engine would not fight as individual ships, but as a single unified organism. But the cost was terrible. The individuals serving as resonance anchors experienced massive neural stress. The human brain was not designed to contain multiple consciousnesses simultaneously. Most anchors would not survive the process. Those who did would be permanently changed, their individual consciousness partially merged with the collective experience of everyone they had connected with. "It's a weapon that only works on humans," Cole said slowly. "And it only works because humans are willing to sacrifice themselves." "That's why it was hidden," Kyle replied. "Your ancestors wanted you to have the option, but they hoped you would never be desperate enough to use it." The Dravak fleet was 8 weeks away from Earth. The numbers were still impossible. Even with the Resonance Engine, success was not guaranteed. But without it, humanity had no chance at all. President Cole made the hardest decision of his life. Activate the Omega Directive, build the Resonance Engine, and ask for volunteers. The call went out across the Federation. The military needed 1,500 people willing to serve as resonance anchors. The message was honest about what it meant. Most volunteers would die. Those who survived would never be the same, but their sacrifice might save humanity. 500 stasis soldiers volunteered immediately. They were warriors who had already given up 6,000 years. Giving up their lives or their sanity seemed like a small thing by comparison. "Sergeant," Chris Baldwin simply said, "we were always meant to be spent in humanity's defense. This is what we are for." But the remaining 1,000 volunteers came from modern humanity. People who had lived in peace, who had never wanted to fight, but who could not stand by and watch their species die. Jake Morrison volunteered without hesitation. He had already crossed too many lines to turn back now. Lisa Grant shocked everyone by volunteering. Henry Brooks tried to talk her out of it. "You don't have to do this. You're a scientist, not a soldier." "That's exactly why I have to," Lisa said. "I spent my life believing humanity had evolved beyond violence. I was wrong. But I still believe in what makes us human. And what makes us human is the choice to sacrifice for others. If we must fight, let us fight together." The Resonance Engine was massive. It took engineers 6 weeks to build it in orbit around Earth, following the ancient schematics. The structure was beautiful in a terrible way, filled with crystalline matrices and quantum processors that hummed with contained power. The volunteers began training immediately. Learning to open their minds to the connection was harder than learning to fire weapons. The human brain instinctively resisted having its boundaries dissolved. But slowly, carefully, the anchors learned to lower their mental walls. Kyle Sanders would serve as the primary anchor, the central node that all others would connect through. He spent hours in meditation, preparing his mind for what was coming. Megan Price took command of the defensive fleet, as she could not serve as an anchor and command simultaneously. Jake Morrison trained alongside the other anchors. The process was strange and unsettling. During practice sessions, he could feel the edges of other minds touching his. Emotions that were not his own would bleed through. Memories from other people would flash in his mind. It felt like losing himself, dissolving into something larger. "You have to let go," Kyle told him during training. "Your individual self is important, but survival requires becoming part of something greater." The Dravak fleet entered the solar system right on schedule. 5,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a formation that blotted out the stars. They were confident, having crushed every opponent they had ever faced. Their commander broadcast a final demand for surrender. President Cole's response was brief. "Humanity chooses to stand." The Dravak commander laughed at this defiance. The AU warrior race had heard similar brave words from hundreds of civilizations. They all died the same way, buried under superior numbers and firepower. The commander ordered the fleet forward, expecting an easy victory. Humanity's defensive fleet of 800 ships formed a line between the enemy and Earth. They were outnumbered 6-1. By conventional military mathematics, they should have lasted maybe an hour before being destroyed. But humanity was done with conventional warfare. The resonance engine activated. 1,500 human minds opened themselves to the connection. Jake Morrison felt it like a wave crashing over him. Suddenly, he was not alone in his skull. He felt Kyle's tactical genius, Megan's strategic brilliance, and the combat experience of 1,000 soldiers. But he also felt their fear, their pain, their determination, and their hope. He was simultaneously himself and part of something incomprehensibly vast. The effect on the fleet was immediate and dramatic. Every ship began moving with perfect synchronization. Complex maneuvers that normally required minutes of communication happened in heartbeats. Each pilot knew instinctively where their allies would be, what the enemy would do, how to respond before the situation even developed. The Dravak fleet found itself facing an enemy that fought like a single organism. Their superior numbers became a disadvantage. Humanity exploited every gap, every mistake, every moment of hesitation with perfect coordination. Ships that should have been destroyed danced through enemy fire, always knowing where the weapons would aim before they fired. But the cost was terrible. The resonance anchors were burning out. Their neural pathways could not handle the massive data flow for long. Jake felt Kyle's mind at the center of the network, holding everything together through sheer force of will. The ancient soldier was pouring everything he was into the connection, becoming the living bridge between humanity's violent past and hopeful future. The battle that should have ended in hours stretched into 3 days of continuous combat. The Dravak commander could not understand what was happening. Every time they adapted to humanity's tactics, the humans changed seamlessly. Every trap they set was avoided. Every weakness they exploited closed before they could capitalize. On the second day, Jake felt the first anchors dying. Their minds simply burned out, overloaded beyond recovery. Each death sent a shock through the network, but the connection held. The remaining anchors absorbed the strain, pushing themselves harder. Megan Price, watching from the command ship, saw the pattern. The Dravak fleet was losing cohesion. Their doctrine did not account for facing a perfectly synchronized enemy. She spotted a critical vulnerability in their formation, a moment of overextension that a conventional force would never be able to exploit in time. Through the resonance network, every human ship saw the opportunity simultaneously. 800 vessels moved as one, striking at the exact same moment. The Dravak command ship, believing itself safely positioned in the rear, suddenly found itself surrounded. Humanity's fury fell upon it from all sides. The command ship exploded in a flash of antimatter. The Dravak fleet, having never lost a command vessel in battle before, fell into confusion. Their rigid military hierarchy could not adapt to sudden decapitation. Orders conflicted, ships collided, panic spread, humanity pressed the advantage ruthlessly. Every lesson Kyle and the stasis soldiers had taught them was applied with perfect execution. They gave no mercy because mercy would mean more human deaths. They fought not with hate but with cold determination to survive. On the fourth day, the remaining Dravak forces retreated from the solar system. They left behind 2,000 destroyed warships and broadcast a message that shocked the galaxy. In Dravak culture, acknowledging an enemy as worthy warriors was the highest honor they could bestow. The memorial ceremony took place on Mars above Vault 7, 3 years after the Battle of Earth. Jake Morrison stood among thousands of people gathered to remember the fallen. He wore the uniform of an admiral now, though sometimes he still felt like the exploration commander who had discovered New Portland's destruction so long ago. The survivors of the Resonance Network stood together in a separate section. There were 1,028 of them, the anchors who had lived through the connection. They looked like everyone else from the outside, but Jake knew they were different. They carried pieces of each other inside their minds, fragments of consciousness that would never fully separate. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Jake could still feel Kyle Sanders's tactical genius stirring in the back of his thoughts. Lisa Grant walked to the memorial platform to speak. She had changed the most visibly. The scientist who once believed humanity had evolved beyond violence now served as a military chaplain, helping soldiers cope with combat trauma. She understood both the cost of war and the necessity of it in ways that few others could. "We believed we had evolved beyond violence," Lisa began, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We were wrong, but we were also right. We had not transcended our capacity for war. We had simply chosen peace. And when that peace was threatened, we found the strength to defend it." She paused, looking at the names carved into the memorial stone. 472 names, starting with Captain Kyle Sanders at the top. These people gave everything so that we could continue to choose peace. They came from an age when war was normal, slept through an age when war was forgotten, and woke to save an age that needed to remember. Their sacrifice was not that they died in battle. Their sacrifice was that they gave up their peace so that we could keep ours. The crowd was silent. Among them were modern humans who had learned to fight and stasis soldiers who had taught them. The two groups had seemed impossibly different at first. The awakened warriors had been harder, colder, shaped by violence in ways that peaceful humanity found disturbing. But 3 years of fighting side by side had bridged that gap. Megan Price stood beside Jake. She was the only surviving senior officer from the original Stasis program. Her military brilliance had helped humanity win battles across the galaxy as they pushed the Dravak back. But she looked tired, older somehow than her frozen age suggested. "What happens now?" Jake asked quietly. Megan looked at the younger man. She could see Kyle's influence in how Jake carried himself, the tactical awareness in how he positioned himself even during a peaceful ceremony. The Resonance Network had left its mark on all the survivors, connecting them in ways that went beyond normal human experience. "Now we remember," Megan said. "We remember that peace is precious because we know the cost of losing it. We remember that our capacity for violence exists not to be used but to prevent its use. And we remember Kyle and all those who slept for 6,000 years so that we could live in peace." The war had continued for 3 years after the Battle of Earth. The Dravak, having lost their aura of invincibility, found themselves facing resistance across the galaxy. The other races of the Galactic Council, inspired by humanity's determination, began developing their own defenses. The Zanari learned strategy from human military advisors. The Kelthans built beautiful but deadly warships. The Provians calculated targeting solutions with mathematical precision. Together, the Allied forces pushed the Dravak back beyond the galactic rim. The warrior race retreated to lick their wounds, promising to return someday. But that someday was not today, and today was what mattered. Henry Brooks had become the Federation's chief historian, tasked with recording everything that happened. He worried about how future generations would remember this time. Would they see it as a necessary defense or as humanity abandoning its peaceful nature? Patricia Flynn, now a full general in truth rather than just title, worked to reform the military. The goal was to maintain readiness without maintaining a state of war. It was a delicate balance. The Federation needed to remember how to fight without becoming a warrior culture like the Dravak. We need to be able to defend ourselves, Patricia explained to the Federation Council. But we should not define ourselves by our capacity for violence. The sword exists, but it stays in its sheath. The stasis vaults on Mars were empty now. All 15,000 soldiers had been awakened during the war. About 12,000 survived, including veterans like Sergeant Chris Baldwin and Corporal Amy Hughes. They faced a choice about how to live in this future they had helped save. Some chose to remain in the military, training new soldiers and sharing their knowledge. They became the living bridge between humanity's violent past and its hopeful future. Others chose to retire, trying to find peace in a galaxy that had finally learned to value warriors. Chris Baldwin became a teacher, instructing young people about military history and tactics. He was blunt with his students. War is not glorious. It is terrible, but sometimes it is necessary. Your job is to be good enough at war that nobody wants to fight you. The resonance engine remained in orbit around Earth, carefully maintained but never activated. The technology was too dangerous and too costly to use except in the most desperate circumstances. But its existence served as a reminder of what humanity was capable of when survival demanded it. Jake Morrison visited Kyle Sanders's memorial marker privately after the ceremony ended. He stood alone before the stone, feeling the ghost of Kyle's presence in his mind. The connection had faded over 3 years, but echoes remained. "We did it," Jake said quietly to the memory. "We survived, and we stayed human while doing it." He remembered Kyle's words from their first meeting. "You built a paradise and forgot that paradises need guardians." Humanity had learned that lesson. They had learned that peace required strength, that survival sometimes demanded sacrifice, and that forgetting how to fight made you vulnerable to those who never forgot. The galaxy was different now. The age of universal peace was over, replaced by something more complex. Most species remained peaceful, but they were no longer naive about it. They maintained defenses, trained soldiers, and remembered that predators existed. It was a harder galaxy, but perhaps a more honest one. Lisa Grant published her new book 3 years after the war. It was not about humanity evolving beyond violence. Instead, it was about humanity's capacity to choose violence or peace consciously, to understand both options and select the better path while maintaining the ability to take the harder one. "We are not peaceful because we cannot be violent," she wrote. "We are peaceful because we choose to be, and that choice is more meaningful because we understand the alternative." The book became required reading in Federation schools. Young people learned about the long peace but also about what ended it. They learned about the price of forgetting danger and the cost of remembering it. They learned that their ancestors had made them soft on purpose, believing that peace was worth the risk. But that softness needed to be balanced with strength. President Cole, near the end of his term, gave a final speech about the war and its aftermath. "We did not want this fight. We tried to avoid it. But when it came, we discovered something about ourselves. We discovered that peace had not erased our capacity for strength. It had only hidden it, waiting for necessity." He continued, "Our ancestors who created Project Warhammer gave us a gift. Not the gift of warriors sleeping in vaults, though that saved us. The real gift was the message their existence sent, that peace is a choice, not a weakness. That we can be gentle because we are strong enough to be gentle. That mercy is only meaningful when you have the power to destroy but choose not to use it." The memorial on Mars bore a simple inscription, chosen from Kyle Sanders's personal logs that Henry had recovered. "We are humanity. We hope for peace, prepare for war, and choose which future we want to build. This is not a weakness. This is our strength." Jake Morrison read those words often. They reminded him of what had been learned at such terrible cost. Humanity had not returned to its old violent ways, but neither had it forgotten the lessons of war. A new balance had been struck, one that honored both the peace they cherished and the courage required to defend it. The galaxy watched humanity with new respect. They were no longer seen as naive peace lovers who had forgotten reality. They were seen as people who chose peace from a position of strength, who could be fierce when necessary but preferred to be kind. Megan Price, in her final report before retiring, wrote, "The hidden weapon was never the resonance engine or the ancient warships or the enhanced soldiers. It was something more fundamental. It was humanity's ability to adapt, to sacrifice, and to choose who they want to be even in the darkest moments. We can be warriors when we must, but we remain human even in war. That is what makes us dangerous. That is what makes us worthy of the peace we fought for." Jake stood on the observation deck of a ship in orbit around Earth, looking down at the blue planet. Somewhere down there, children were being born who would grow up in a galaxy that understood both peace and war. They would be taught to value peace but never to take it for granted. They would learn history from those who had lived it. He thought about Kyle Sanders and the other stasis soldiers who had given up everything.